purpose of today's meeting is the info meeting for Odyssey of the Mind. And I did see, I think it was 5 people did sign up as an interest form, because Tom, we did put out an interest form online, but we obviously have far more people on here. So we brought Tom in from, what's your title, Tom?
I am actually the co-director for the Odyssey program in Loudoun County, which is both regions 14 and 16 of Virginia.
Okay, awesome. So we brought Tom in so he could maybe give us a little bit of an overview of what this might look like for this next year. We would love to have an Odyssey of the Mind team or two. 2 years ago, we did have a team, 1 or 2. And then last year, unfortunately, we didn't have any coaches. We had kids that wanted to do it, but we didn't have any coaches. So I thought, being at the high school level, that coaching would be a little easier, because when my kids were younger, when they did the elementary, I thought that was a little more involved. But we're hoping that some parents, or I do believe, and you'll talk to this, I think maybe high schoolers can coach too. So maybe we can start with just giving a little bit of an overview, Tom, and then we can take some questions in the chat. If you do have some questions, maybe put those in there, and then we can, and depending on if it's easy enough or not, we can put, we might be able to unmute people. But and our next meeting does start at 7. So if we can kind of do this and see where we can go with it.
All right. How familiar is everybody with Odyssey of the Mind in general terms? Should I start with sort of introducing it right from the beginning?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and just kind of give an overview?
Okay. So Odyssey of the Mind is a program that's designed to encourage creativity by having some competitions. It provides teams of students with a choice of several different problems that they can pick and solve. They work on these problems from basically the beginning of the school year up until the competition time, typically in the March time frame. And so they have all those months to put together a solution. The solutions are generally in the form of an 8-minute performance with sets, props, and so on. But it's more than just a drama exercise, because there's always technical requirements, different problems having different elements of that. There's always one problem that involves building 1 or more vehicles. There's another problem, for example, that involves building structures out of balsa and seeing how much weight they can hold, and maybe other kinds of abuse the structure can withstand. The goal is to come up with the most creative possible solutions. There's no one right answer to any Odyssey problem. It's an exercise in what we call divergent thinking, to get outside the box and come up with something really creative and interesting. And then in addition to that, we also challenge students with what we call a spontaneous problem. At the day of the competition, they will be given, they'll be brought to a room basically where they will then be given a problem to solve on the spot, using maybe some materials that be provided to them. And they will basically just have to come up with the best answer or answers they can right then and there, having never heard that problem before. That said, we do provide plenty of avenues for finding spontaneous problems for teams to practice with, so they can get used to the concept of the spontaneous problem, but the actual problem they see will be a secret up until the moment they walk in the room. So those are 2 basic components of how Odyssey works: is the long-term problem that is given to teams to solve, and the spontaneous problem. Teams are composed of up to 7 students, and we have different divisions that basically correspond to, at least in the United States, to elementary school, middle school, and high school grades, so that high school teams are competing against high school teams, for example. Then, let's see, in terms of forming the teams, generally they're formed, each team is, 1 or more teams are formed by a school. So normally there would be the team from a particular school. They generally, with certain exceptions, teams do not tend to cross schools, but there are ways we can work that if there's a need to. In general, the traditional way we've done this is that on competition day, we will have a high school that we arrange to use, and all the teams from the region will descend upon that high school. They'll each have their appointed times for their long-term problem, and they'll have their appointed times for their spontaneous problem. It's a great fun day with a lot of chance to see teams to see each other and see what they've done, both formally and informally. Unfortunately, it's a design that's not well suited to a pandemic. So we're still in the throes of figuring out some of the options for this year, though I'm going to, in a moment, explain what we know so far in that regard. But that's sort of, in a nutshell, the traditional form of it. I should say, too, that what we do is teams compete here on the regional level. There's 2 regions within Loudoun County. And then whichever region the school falls into, the team competes in that region. The successful teams in each problem division of a region then advance to a state level competition for the state of Virginia. And then teams that are successful come in first place basically at the state level, then advance to an international level competition, which is generally held either at the either held in Michigan or Iowa. So that's, and then they're competing against teams from literally all over the world. The teams from China, Germany, other parts of the United States, Poland, so on and so forth. So it's a real big thing to go to this world level competition, as we call it. It's an amazing experience for students who make it there. But we try to offer a very good experience even at the regional level, since obviously that's where the whole program is going to basically be for many people. So that's sort of the program in a very, very small nutshell. And what I can say about this year so far, if you haven't had a chance already, you'll want to take a look at the odysseyofthemind.com website. That's the international organization that runs the program. They have information up there about how the program works in general, as well as how it's going to, so how much about what we know so far about how it's going to run this year. And what they're looking at is they've developed a 2-track system. The teams can either register as traditional teams or as what they're calling virtual teams. The traditional teams will pretty much normally proceed as they always have through Odyssey. They will be formed at the school level. A school that buys a membership in the traditional track gets to put together up to 5 teams, 1 for each of the 5 problems. And those teams will, if possible, compete in a physical environment in front of actual judges in the same room with them. There is, however, the very strong caveat that is going to be subject to ongoing discussion as to what is in fact safe and possible, because safety is absolutely our number one concern here. And so it's possible that they could wind up competing, as happened with with most of last year's teams, that they competed in a virtual environment where they recorded their performance. They sent additional video recordings with the actual performance video. The additional video showed details of their solution that might not be visible from watching the performance. And they also had a framework for competing in the spontaneous problem remotely and online. So we have the option for what we're calling the traditional track to still be virtual at some or all levels. So it's possible that we may decide to make the regional virtual, maybe we'll make the state virtual, but they'll be capable of holding a physical world tournament, for example. We just don't know at each level. It's going to be evaluated and decided as we get to that point. There's also what's called a virtual track. Teams that register there do not necessarily have to be school-based like in the traditional track. So that can be just any collection of team members who brought together under the auspices of some parents or whatever. The membership there is for a single team. You don't get the 5 teams like you do with a school membership. And the competition is 100% virtual, no matter what the situation winds up being in the world at the time. So those teams go there. Generally for a school, I would think that the traditional membership would be the way to go, because that gives you the option of having the more traditional program, and it lets you have the 5 teams or up to 5 teams for one membership. And like I say, we will certainly be making some calls as to how we'll do the physical, if we do it at all. Right now, it really hasn't even been appropriate for us to be approaching the schools to even ask about the use of a school facility in 2021. The school system is dealing with way more important issues than that right now. As the time approaches, as things go on, we will eventually enter into that discussion with the school system. As we do that, we'll determine if it's even possible, and if it is possible, we'll determine what kind of maybe restrictions will have to be on it. In the past, we've allowed teams, for example, to gather in the halls and wait between performances there and whatnot and see each other. We may have to do something like, say, teams can only come in to the building just in time for their performance, go to their performance site, do their thing, and then we'll have to leave the building immediately. We may well take the award ceremony at the end, which is a huge gathering, and say instead we'll simply announce the winners online in some form without an award ceremony in person. That would be terribly unfortunate, because I enjoy the award ceremony immensely, but we're just keeping all options open at this point. Another thing we don't know yet is really how many teams are going to be interested in participating this year in Odyssey of the Mind. There's so much different in the way of demands on students, teachers, and parents that we just don't know what the feeling is going to be towards this program. If the numbers are lower, we may combine, for example, Region 14s and 16 into effectively just one region. So, and we might even combine with other regions around the area. It's really a lot up in the air this year. So most years I'd give you a very definitive speech about how this works. This year, a lot more open. So let me stop at that point and see what sort of questions there are.
Okay, is anybody, you can unmute yourself if we have about 23 people. If you do have a question for Tom. Because we do, so on our PT board, acl.ptboard.com, we do have the interest form. So since I do see a lot of you haven't registered, or 23 of you that are on here, and I 5 people did express some interest. The main thing we need, if we do have already, at least with 5, we would have a team, right? Because 5 is the minimum. Mm-hmm. And so if we really, the coaches is where this comes in, is with helping us in that area. I mean, the PTSA, we have money set aside to be able to help fund and set up the at least paying for the membership. And so being able to do that, and then depending how many teams we have and how much revenue we do have coming in, we can see where we can help from there. But we do have some money put aside to be able to support those teams. So we're open to any questions that people might have.
Good evening. This is Sandeep. I have a question.
Yeah. Sure.
Tom mentioned earlier about the approach for forming the teams, and if I understand it correctly, you would prefer to see if a team, all the team members come from a particular high school, and try to avoid where we are mixing the high schools, right?
Yeah.
Well, academies, are you talking, is this quite like the academies allowed and would be the high school?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I should have prefaced it by saying that because I recognize that Academies is a little bit different than other schools in the county in that regard. So yes, Academies of Loudoun has sponsored teams in the past and is of course welcome to sponsor them in the future.
Okay, so it will be Academy of Loudoun team and not that
But the kids
freedom team which is being coached by Academy of Loudoun.
Correct. But so the kids could be from Tuscarora, Rockridge, Light Ridge, but it is an Academies allowed in team.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, I have a question. So Tom mentioned that if you form a virtual team, then it could be different schools or different localities coming together to form a virtual team. So I'm wondering, is it possible to have an Academies of Loudoun virtual team?
Sure.
Yeah, you absolutely could. I think you'd want to look at it in the bigger context of what else is going on at Academies. And see which makes the more sense as to how to do that. But there's certainly no prohibition on that.
Because we could have on the I believe on the form, I was going to look at it. I think we did ask if there was the interest in the virtual versus the in person. And so I think we could have a team that's virtual and we could have a team that's in person too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, just bear in mind from a cost perspective, that a in-person, or what we call it traditional, because we don't know for sure it'll be in person, but a traditional membership, I believe, is $135 and covers up to 5 teams. A virtual membership is $100 and covers 1 team. So if you were to do one of each, you'd be spending $235 on memberships.
Okay, I got it.
So,
but I also,
and that's not my rules. That's that's CCI's rules, so I have no control of that.
Right. But I was also wondering that, let's say the kids, because it happened, not to our team, but another team last year where they prepared and they prepped everything, but then everything went virtual anyway. And, so it's hard to do everything as in you're doing it face to face, but then it ends up being virtual. It was such a letdown for all of the kids and all that they put in. So.
Oh, I understand that completely. It was a huge letdown for me too. Not being able to see them. But I think all we can say this year is be prepared. We just don't know what will be. I mean, I don't think anybody has a crystal ball that tells us what 2021 is going to look like, even though that seems like it's not that far away. So just be prepared. Think about how you can video the performance to best effect. If that winds up being the way it's presented. Different teams dealt with that in very different ways. For example, one of our Loudoun County teams that actually placed very highly in Worlds did their performance out on the cul-de-sac where some of the kids lived. So they had good social distancing between all the kids while they performed in an outdoor space. And they videotaped that. And like I said, did very well. So you just have to kind of go into this year with the mindset that it might happen. Last year was terrible because it hit us all like a ton of bricks. We had no idea this thing was coming down the pike, and it was very hard for teams that had not thought this way, which of course nobody had.
Yeah, I did want to say, I did look at the form, and we didn't put if you wanted virtual or in person on there, because I think we wanted to gauge interest first to see, and then we were going to reach out to those, because it closes on the 18th, I believe, for the interest form, and then we were going to reach out to people to see if they were interested in which way we wanted to go. We were also looking to Ferry, who's our secretary, and she's on the call right now. She oversees in a way, so she's the contact, but we are looking for someone to be the chair, who would kind of organize the coaches. So if someone on this call was interested in that, just with kind of disseminating information, we know there's some training. Can you elaborate just a little bit on the training too? Because I think I saw a couple dates coming up.
Yeah, we're still working on some of that, but typically what we've done is had what we call coordinator training first, We usually offer 3 different sessions, and that's for that person who's going to be sort of the liaison person for the school, the one sort of interacting between us and all the coaches. And we've typically done that through 3 different in-person meetings throughout the county that people can choose from. This year, we're going to do it a little bit differently. We're going to have a couple of online meetings instead, no physical meetings. And we're going to throw it open a little bit more so that not only coordinators, but potential coaches, whatnot, really anybody is welcome to attend those. And because we wanted this year, instead of just simply, if you will, a sales pitch or a teaching pitch, we want to have a little bit more of an interactive conversation to get a better sense of where people's interests, concerns, and whatnot lie with the whole nature of whether we do the virtual and whatnot. So look for a couple of dates coming up, probably towards the last couple of weeks of September. We'll be getting that announcement out soon on the website, the local website, and also by the email chain we have that hopefully you've got somebody at least who's on our coach or coordinator list. If not, send me a note and I will get them added to it so they get the updates.
Okay. Yeah, Ferry, let's double check on that. Just making, I wasn't sure if Pink was getting those. Okay, and then also I had a question on what is the typical, like, is it really best for the teams to begin in October or as soon as possible, and then it would potentially happen in March?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in an ideal world, sooner is better. However, it depends a little bit on the sort of pacing the team wants to take. If you start earlier, you've got to realize you're running a little bit more of a marathon, less of a sprint.
Yeah.
And so it's always going to be more intense towards the end, getting ready for the competition. But, you know, if teams want to get together now, one thing we recommend is they can just start working spontaneous problems as they get together. That'll give them a feel for how they're working as a group, as a team. It will not commit them to choosing a particular long-term problem, because once they do commit to that, they're kind of, you know, stuck with it. So it's often better to get a feel for how the team dynamic is going and what the strengths of the team are, and that may help in then choosing the long-term problem when the time comes. So, and if you do get teams together now and you discover that maybe there needs to be a little bit of reshuffling to make the team dynamic better, no harm done there. Once you've chosen the long-term problem and read into it, then you really can't switch team members around anymore at that point.
Okay. So, all right, we've got a couple more minutes. Does anybody else have some questions?
Hello, good evening. I have a quick question.
Sure.
My daughter participated in OOTM when she was in middle school. And we remember at that time, you know, they had met several times face-to-face. Once, you know, they had weekly meetings, and towards the end, they were meeting every day.
Mm-hmm.
How would, you know, that operate in a virtual world? You mentioned there is a virtual team, or there could be a virtual team and a physical team. How would that work? Can you please explain?
We're probably going to be getting more resources from CCI to give some ideas on that. Obviously, you know, the whole world's favorite right now is Zoom type calls, and teams can do, you know, things that way. They can, you know, get together on a call like this and talk about what they're doing, and then they can say, okay, team member number 1, why don't you go off and start working on this particular set piece? Team member 2, you can work on this costume, and so on, to divide up the work that way. You know, possibly they can find ways to get together physically in socially distant, appropriate fashions, whether it's outdoors on somebody's patio and spread out or whatever. You know, it's going to be a challenge for the coach. I totally understand that, but it's going to take some creativity to figure out some of the best ways to do that. And I know to an extent it's going to be hard with the kids who are already spending probably way more time than they want online to do even more if they go that route.
Yeah. Appreciate that answer, Tom. Thank you.
Okay.
If you're just joining us too, you're in the right place. We are going to start our meeting a little after 7. We're just doing an Odyssey of the Mind info night right now. And if you are here for the meeting, if you can put your name in the chat section, we need to take attendance for our meetings. And we also need to double check who's a member because we have a number of things to vote on tonight. So, but anyway, so we have a couple more minutes. Does anybody else have any questions for Tom about Odyssey, how Odyssey of the Mind might work this year?
Given Odyssey of the Mind itself, you know, given this climate, we're doing a lot of things virtual. Do you believe that some of the prompts, some of the problems that kids would solve may also be virtual friendly?
Yes, they specifically kind of did a mid-course correction if they were writing the problems this year. I haven't read through all of them yet, but the intent was to make them very much virtual friendly, as you say. And that takes into account both what the students have to do to get ready for it and how the judges would have to go about judging it if they're seeing only a video.
Okay.
And so there are a couple of things like balsa are going to have some very special rules because crushing the balsa structure is a physical activity. And so be working out ways that the structure will be submitted for its crushing in separate from the actual 8-minute performance, which is different than usual.
Hi, Tom. I had a question. So my daughter's done Odyssey for some time, so we kind of understand the rubrics of the scoring. I'm just curious: will the virtual team and the in-person team be competing in the same for the same against each other as well, or it's a separate parallel route?
Right. If a team registers for the traditional track, if one team registers for the traditional track and one team registers for the virtual track, they will not be competing against each other. If on the traditional, and that holds true even if we have to do the teams in the traditional track virtually. I know this is getting confusing, but if we have to hold all the competitions virtually, we'll still have 2 separate piles, if you will, of teams, those that registered as traditional and those that registered as virtual.
Okay, but the problems are the same.
The problem is exactly the same. It does not change 1 iota. The clarifications will all be in common.
Okay.
And so on. So.
Thank you.
Okay, I think since we're getting close here to our meeting, if you do have some more questions, if you don't mind, if you could send them to Ferry, she's secretary at aclptsa.org. Again, that's secretary at aclptsa.org. We can put that in the chat too. We're also found on PT board, acl.ptboard.com. And so if you are interested at all, again, this is not a commitment. Please fill out that interest form so we'll know where we stand and so we can reach out to you and try and see what interest and what we can do for this year to have possibly some teams. So anyway, thank you, Tom. I appreciate you joining us and for your time. And if we have some questions, we will definitely reach out to you.
That's great. And just make sure that you got somebody, like I say, who's tied into our email list. If you're not sure, let me know, and I will make sure of that. And we will be also collecting some interest information countywide in the not too distant future. So as we try to gauge that. So we'll look for that too. All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Appreciate it.